Welcome to the threshold, that awkward space between the living world and whatever cosmic joke awaits us on the other side. Tonight, we journey to the blood-soaked hospitals of the Crimean War, where a young woman named Florence Nightingale first picked up that famous lamp, and apparently never learned how to put the damn thing down. History books call her the lady with the lamp, but tonight you'll meet Florence Nightingale, the supernatural nurse whose bedside manner is to die for. Literally, Dr. Sarah Chen had always prided herself on being the rational one in a profession that attracted more than its fair share of weirdos. As head of the psychiatric ward at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, she'd seen patients claim they were Napoleon, Jesus, and once memorably, a sentient breakfast burrito. So when the night shift nurses whispered about ghosts, she filed it under occupational hazard and moved on. But at 3:47 a.m. on this particular Tuesday, because of course supernatural nonsense always happens at ungodly hours when you desperately need coffee, her rational worldview was being tested by footsteps that sounded suspiciously like someone wearing Victorian-era boots and a hella bad attitude. The rhythm was unmistakable: click click pause, click click pause. Like someone walking while dramatically sighing every few steps. This wasn't the frantic scurrying of understaffed night nurses or the confused wandering of patients looking for bathrooms. This was the gait of someone who had nowhere urgent to be but insisted on making it everyone else's problem. During orientation, the other nurses had cornered Sarah like she'd accidentally joined a very specific support group for the damned. Florence Nightingale, they'd whispered, clutching their coffee cups like religious artifacts. She shows up whenever someone's about to kick the bucket. Been pulling the night shift from hell for over 150 years, and she still hasn't figured out how to clock out. Sarah had laughed then, assuming it was typical hospital hazing. What's next? A vampire in radiology who only works the graveyard shift. Don't joke about Gary, Nurse Janet had said seriously. He's actually quite nice once you get past the whole blood thing. Sarah wasn't laughing now, mainly because the hallway had suddenly become colder than a hospital administrator's heart, and her breath was coming out in puffs that looked distinctly judgmental. That's when she saw her.
Florence Nightingale materialized at the end of the corridor like someone's great-aunt stepping out of a sepia-toned photograph that had seen better days. She wore the classic Victorian nurse uniform, dark dress, white collar, cap that had probably been pristine back when people thought mercury was good for you. But this wasn't the sanitized textbook version. This uniform looked like it had been through every medical emergency since the invention of medicine, with stains that seemed to have their own zip codes. Her lamp cast shadows that moved with the confidence of creatures who'd never heard of physics and didn't plan to start respecting it now. And her face was beautiful in that otherworldly way that immediately made you wonder what the catch was. Spoiler alert, the catch was her eyes, which were black as the void and about twice as judgmental. "You're not supposed to be here," Sarah whispered, then immediately felt stupid for talking to what was obviously a stress-induced hallucination brought on by too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Florence tilted her head like a curious bird contemplating whether you were worth the effort of haunting. "Neither are they," she said, gesturing toward the patient rooms with the air of someone pointing out that the restaurant was out of soup. "But suffering calls, and unlike telemarketers, when I answer, people actually appreciate it." The legend began in 1854, when Florence Nightingale packed her bags for what she thought would be a nice little nursing adventure in the Crimean War. Clearly, no one had explained to her that war was not typically where people went for pleasant working conditions and reasonable hours.
The hospital was less medical facility and more elaborate way to die while technically receiving health care. Picture your worst hospital experience, then imagine it designed by someone who actively hated both patients and the concept of hygiene. Sewage flowed under the beds like a very unwelcome water feature. Rats had formed their own union and were demanding better working conditions, and the mortality rate was so high that the Grim Reaper had started outsourcing. Florence arrived with 38 volunteer nurses, most of whom took one look around and immediately started updating their resumes. But Florence was different. While her colleagues practiced there, I meant to apply to a different war's speeches. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She seemed drawn to the worst cases, soldiers with gangrene so advanced it had its own weather system, men so delirious with fever they were having philosophical debates with their boots. While others fled, Florence pulled up a chair like she was settling in for a particularly engaging book club discussion about mortality. The soldiers started noticing something off about their favorite nurse. Sure, she was caring and dedicated, but she was also really interested in their dying words. Like, uncomfortably interested. They'd try to ask for water, and she'd lean in with a notebook. No, no, before the water, tell me about your childhood trauma. Make it snappy. You're running out of time. Florence herself was changing too. While everyone else was losing weight from the horrific food and constant stress, she seemed to be thriving. She needed less sleep, ate less food, and had developed an unsettling ability to predict exactly when someone would die. Not sometime this week predictions, but Tuesday at 3:17 a.m., right after he asks for his mother precision. It was like she'd become a human death prediction app, which would have been impressive if it weren't so deeply creepy. During the siege of Sevastopol, after working for 72 hours straight, because apparently work-life balance wasn't invented until the 20th century, Florence made a discovery that would change everything. In the hospital basement, behind what appeared to be a wall but was actually a poorly disguised door, because even Victorian-era hospitals had secret rooms apparently, she found a chamber that definitely wasn't on the architectural plans. The walls were covered in names, thousands of them, scratched into stone by people who clearly had a lot of time and very little hope. These were the forgotten dead, soldiers who died without anyone bothering to write home about it. It was like the world's most depressing autograph collection. The moment Florence stepped into that chamber, she felt something shift. The names seemed to glow with their own light, and she started hearing voices, not the maybe I should cut back on the laudanum kind of voices, but actual conversations with people who were definitively not there.
She became obsessed with that room, spending her free time, what little she had, down there tracing names and having heart-to-hearts with thin air. The other nurses found her collapsed there one morning, unconscious and colder than a medical bill. When she woke up 3 days later, something had fundamentally changed. Her eyes had gone from warm brown to staring into the abyss, and the abyss is staring back. And she'd developed new abilities that weren't covered in any nursing manual. She could now predict not just when someone would die, but their exact final words, their deepest regrets, and whether they'd left the oven on at home. More disturbing, she seemed to be collecting these moments, storing them like some sort of supernatural hoarder. The final transformation came during a cholera outbreak that made the regular hospital conditions look like a luxury spa. Florence had become obsessed with documentation, filling journals with names, death times, and increasingly weird sketches that looked like someone had tried to draw souls leaving bodies, but only had a crayon and severe sleep deprivation. On March 15th, 1855, she met Private Tommy Hartwell, 18 years old and dying from an infection that had turned his leg into something that would make a zombie lose its appetite. He'd been calling for his mother for 3 days, which would have been touching if it weren't so loud and persistent. Florence sat beside his bed just after midnight, holding his hand with the intensity of someone about to receive the world's most important secret. "Tell me about home, Tommy," she whispered urgently. "Tell me about your mother, your childhood, that embarrassing thing you did when you were 12. Really paint me a picture here. I'm collecting memories and yours better be good."
As Tommy rambled about Sunday dinners and his mother's terrible cooking, apparently she burned water, something extraordinary happened. The more he talked, the stronger Florence became, like she was running on some sort of death-powered energy drink. When Tommy's heart finally stopped, Florence leaned down and kissed his forehead. The watching nurses swore they saw something flow from the boy into her lamp, something bright and wispy that looked suspiciously like a soul being involuntarily recruited for eternal customer service. In that moment, Florence felt herself being pulled toward whatever came after life, hearing every soul she'd ever witnessed calling to her like the world's most persistent group chat. But instead of joining them, she made a choice that would haunt hospital corridors for centuries. She decided to become middle management for the afterlife. She crossed over and came back, bringing with her the authority to collect souls and the cosmic responsibility of making sure no one died alone. Death hadn't ended her career, It had given her the ultimate job security. Back in the present, Dr. Sarah Chen watched Florence glide toward room 237. With the confidence of someone who'd never met a dying person, she couldn't help transition to whatever came next. Inside, 93-year-old William Ashford was having his final moment. Family still hours away because apparently even death couldn't cure terrible traffic. Florence entered the room like she was making a house call, approaching the bed with professional efficiency. "Hello, William," she said gently. "I'm here for your checkout process. Don't worry, I've got excellent reviews on Afterlife Yelp." William's eyes opened, cloudy but somehow relieved. "Are you an angel?" "More like a supernatural Uber driver," Florence replied kindly. "Now, tell me about your life while I get your paperwork ready for the other side."
As William spoke about his wife Eleanor, his 40 years of teaching, and his prize-winning tomatoes, Florence listened with the focus of someone taking very important notes. Wisps of light began gathering around William like the world's most beautiful going-away party. "Eleanor," he whispered finally, "tell her I said the lasagna recipe needs more garlic." When his heart stopped, Florence pressed her lips to his forehead, and the light flowed into her lamp like she was some sort of supernatural collection agency. But unlike other collection agencies, she actually made people feel better about the whole process. Florence straightened, her lamp now burning slightly brighter, like it had just received a 5-star energy rating. She noticed Sarah watching from the doorway. "He's in good hands now," Florence said matter-of-factly. "I've got a whole support group of souls in here. They're very welcoming. There's cookies." As Florence continued her eternal rounds, Sarah finally understood the cosmic joke. Death was terrifying, yes, but it was also just another administrative process, and Florence Frightingale was the universe's way of making sure the paperwork got filed correctly. She wasn't just a ghost. She was customer service for the afterlife, ensuring that crossing over came with proper documentation and maybe a friendly chat about your life achievements. And in a world where dying alone was humanity's greatest fear, having an overly dedicated supernatural nurse who refused to let anyone go through the process unsupervised was actually pretty comforting. The lady with the lamp had become the keeper of the final light, and her customer service was eternal. Sure, she was terrifying, but she was also strangely reassuring, like having a really competent but slightly supernatural hospice worker who never took vacation days. And honestly, if you had to have someone help you transition to whatever cosmic joke awaited on the other side, you could do worse than Florence Frightingale, the nurse who turned death into a well-managed, thoroughly documented, and surprisingly pleasant experience, even if her bedside manner was literally to die for. And so Florence Frightingale continues her eternal rounds, lamp in hand, collecting final stories and providing customer service for the afterlife with the efficiency of someone who's had 150 years to perfect her system. Next time on Tales from the Threshold, we'll meet Dr. Edmund Blackwell, the surgeon whose hands never stopped operating, even after his own heart ceased to beat. Spoiler alert. His post-mortem surgical reviews are to die for. If you felt the chill of her presence tonight, or if you're suddenly wondering about the customer service quality of your local afterlife, subscribe to join our vigil. Because you never know when the next soul will need processing. Until next time, keep your lamp burning bright, because you never know who might be walking the halls tonight with a clipboard and an eternity to kill.